Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Eric's last moment unfolds in a suffocating hush that presses against the walls of the room like a living thing, a single stretched breath in which time seems to fracture, because this is not merely the passing of a man but the detonation of a legacy, and as Eric Forrester lies there with the weight of decades in his eyes, his family gathered around him in a semicircle of fear, denial, and reverence, the truth he has buried beneath charm, power, and patriarchal authority claws its way to the surface, demanding to be spoken no matter the cost, and Ridge feels it before a single word is uttered, that instinctive tightening in his chest that tells him the foundation of his world is about to crack, while Liam stands frozen between hope and dread, sensing that whatever comes next will not only redefine who they are to Eric but who they are to themselves, because Eric's breathing grows shallow, ragged, as if each inhale is negotiating with fate for permission to continue, and when he finally whispers, "I have to tell you," the room tilts, the air thinning as every unresolved argument, every silent betrayal, every carefully constructed lie converges on that unfinished sentence, and Ridge steps closer, desperation etched into his face, torn between wanting to hear the truth and wanting to silence it forever, because Eric's eyes lock onto his son's with a gravity that strips away decades of rivalry, resentment, and wounded pride, reducing them to a father and a son standing at the edge of an irreversible revelation, and Eric's voice trembles not from weakness alone but from the magnitude of what he is about to unleash, because he knows that confession is not an act of absolution here but an act of destruction, a deliberate collapse of the narrative he has allowed Ridge to build his life upon, and when the words finally come, halting yet unmistakably clear, they land like a death sentence wrapped in truth, revealing that Ridge is not who he has believed himself to be, that the bloodline he has defended with ferocity and loyalty is a fabrication born of fear and secrecy, and in that instant Ridge's world implodes, his knees buckling as the meaning sinks in, because Eric admits that the choices he made years ago, the affair hidden beneath layers of denial, the manipulation of paternity, were not mistakes of passion but calculated decisions rooted in insecurity, decisions that shaped Ridge's identity, ambitions, and battles, and Ridge hears his father confess that everything he built, every rivalry with Brooke, every war with his siblings, every moment of self-righteous certainty, was fueled by a lie Eric allowed to grow unchecked, and the devastation is immediate and visceral, Ridge collapsing not only under the weight of betrayal but under the realization that his sense of self has been irrevocably compromised, while Liam, standing just behind him, feels his own heart fracture because Eric's confession does not stop there, because secrets never exist in isolation, they ripple outward, and Eric, compelled by the finality of death, continues, revealing that the consequences of that long-ago deception have poisoned generations, influencing marriages, divorces, power struggles, and alliances, and Liam understands with sickening clarity that his own pain, his own fractured relationships, are collateral damage from a truth denied too long, and the room fills with the sound of quiet sobbing, not dramatic or explosive, but hollow, the sound of people realizing that the ground beneath them was never solid, and Eric, summoning the last reserves of his strength, admits that he watched the damage unfold for years and told himself silence was mercy, that preserving the family image was worth the cost, and Ridge hears this and feels rage burn through the shock, because silence was never mercy, it was control, and Eric's final confession strips him of the authority he wielded so effortlessly, revealing a man who chose comfort over courage until the very end, and as the truth settles, Ridge's collapse becomes symbolic, his physical body giving way as his identity shatters, and Liam reaches out instinctively, not knowing whether to comfort or seek comfort, because Eric's words have rewritten the past and poisoned the future in a single breath, and Eric's face contorts with regret as he acknowledges that he is too late to fix anything, that his confession cannot heal the wounds it creates, but he insists it must be spoken. Because death has clarified what life obscured, that truth denied becomes a legacy of pain, and Ridge, struggling to breathe through the betrayal, demands to know why now, why in this final cruel moment, and Eric answers with brutal honesty, because he can no longer bear the weight of the lie as he crosses into death, because carrying it into the grave would mean condemning them all to continue living in its shadow, and this admission offers no comfort, because timing does not absolve damage. And Liam realizes that Eric's confession is not a gift but a reckoning, a forced confrontation with reality that none of them are prepared to survive intact, and as Eric's voice weakens further, he asks for forgiveness not as a plea but as a confession of its impossibility, acknowledging that some truths cannot be forgiven, only endured, and Ridge hears this and understands that the man he idolized and fought against in equal measure is leaving him not with guidance but with ruins, and the emotional devastation ripples through the family, each member processing how the secret redefines their role, their loyalties, their grievances, because nothing remains untouched, and Eric's final breath approaches, his eyes searching each face as if memorizing the consequences of his honesty, and when he finally exhales, the room does not erupt into chaos but sinks into stunned silence, because death has arrived hand in hand with truth, and the weight of what has been revealed is too heavy for immediate reaction, leaving Ridge collapsed not only physically but spiritually, Liam broken by the understanding that the past cannot be rewritten and the future will be built on fractured ground, and Eric's last moment lingers as a scar on the family psyche, his final words echoing long after his heart stops, because the darkest family secret has been exposed not in a moment of redemption but in one of irreversible loss, and Ridge, staring at the lifeless body of the man who raised him under false pretenses, knows that nothing will ever be the same again, that every memory must be re-examined, every belief questioned, and every relationship renegotiated, and Liam, wiping tears he does not remember shedding, understands that Eric's confession has changed everything not because it revealed a single shocking fact, but because it shattered the illusion that love without truth can survive, and as the family remains frozen around the deathbed, the devastating reality settles in that Eric's legacy will no longer be measured by his success or authority but by the courage he found too late, leaving behind a truth so destructive that it cannot be ignored, only carried forward, reshaping their lives forever in the long, echoing silence of what comes after the last breath. The silence that follows Eric's final breath is not peaceful. It is heavy, swollen with everything that has been said too late and everything that can never be taken back, and in that stillness the family remains suspended between the man Eric was and the truth he left behind, because death has not closed the story but cracked it wide open, and Ridge, still on his knees, feels the room spin as if gravity itself has shifted, his body reacting before his mind can fully catch up to the enormity of what has been revealed. Because grief alone would have been survivable, even expected, but grief braided with betrayal is something else entirely, something corrosive that seeps into memory and rewrites it from the inside out, and as Ridge stares at Eric's lifeless face, he searches for signs of the father he thought he knew, the certainty, the authority, the unshakable confidence, but all he sees now is a man who ran out of time, and that realization hurts almost as much as the confession itself, because it forces Ridge to confront the possibility that the version of Eric he loved and feared was as carefully constructed as the lie that defined his own identity, and around them the others begin to move, not with urgency but with hesitation, as if any sudden sound might fracture what little remains intact, and Liam finally exhales, a shaky breath he didn't realize he was holding, his hands trembling as he rubs them together, because the truth Eric unleashed has lodged itself in his chest like shrapnel, and he understands that this moment will follow him for the rest of his life, that every future decision will carry the echo of these last words, and as Steffi quietly closes Eric's eyes, the finality of death becomes undeniable, but closure remains elusive, because truth without time to process is not closure, it is an open wound, and Ridge, rising unsteadily to his feet, feels the urge to scream, to demand answers from a man who can no longer respond, to rewind time to a moment before those words were spoken, yet he also knows with sickening clarity that even if Eric had stayed silent, the lie would have continued to poison everything it touched, and that knowledge offers no comfort, only a different kind of ache, one rooted in inevitability rather than choice. As the family slowly disperses from the room, each person retreats into their own private reckoning, but Ridge cannot bring himself to leave, because leaving would mean accepting that this is real, that his father is gone and the truth is here to stay, and he finds himself replaying every moment of his life through a new lens, every argument with Eric, every rivalry with his siblings, every time he asserted his place as heir and protector of the Forrester name, and now those memories feel unstable, like photographs left too long in the sun, their edges curling, their colors fading, and he wonders which emotions were genuine and which were built on a foundation that never truly belonged to him, and that question terrifies him more than the truth itself, because it threatens to unravel not just his past but his sense of purpose, and Liam, lingering in the hallway, leans against the wall as if his legs might give out at any moment, his mind racing ahead to the conversations that will inevitably follow, the explanations, the fallout, the pain that will ripple outward beyond this room, beyond this family, because secrets of this magnitude never stay contained, and he realizes that Eric's confession has placed a burden on all of them, not just to process it but to decide what to do with it, how to live honestly in the aftermath of a lie that shaped generations. When Ridge finally steps out of the room, his expression is hollow, stripped of the confidence that once defined him, and Liam sees in his eyes something deeply unsettling, not just grief but disorientation, as if Ridge no longer knows where he belongs. And for the first time Liam understands that strength is not immunity, that even the most commanding presence can be undone by a single sentence spoken at the wrong moment. And they stand there in silence, two men bound by blood, loyalty, and now shared devastation, unsure of how to speak without reopening wounds that are already bleeding, and Ridge eventually breaks the silence with a bitter laugh that contains no humor at all, because laughter is sometimes the body's last defense against collapse. And he mutters that everything makes sense now, every fight, every insecurity, every need to prove himself, and Liam flinches at the weight of those words, because recognition does not equal relief, it only sharpens the pain, and as the reality settles deeper, Ridge feels anger begin to surface beneath the numbness, not explosive yet but simmering, directed not only at Eric but at himself for never questioning the narrative he was given, for defending a truth that was never true, and that anger scares him, because it threatens to consume whatever remains of his grief. In the days that follow, the house becomes a place of quiet tension, conversations hushed, eyes avoiding one another, because everyone is afraid of saying the wrong thing, of triggering another collapse, and Ridge moves through the space like a ghost, present but distant, replaying Eric's final words again and again, searching for nuance, for a different interpretation, for anything that might soften the blow, but truth is stubborn, and it does not bend to desperation. And he finds himself oscillating between fury and sorrow, between missing his father and resenting him, between wanting to honor his memory and wanting to tear it apart, because how do you mourn someone who shattered your identity in their final breath? And Liam, watching this unraveling, struggles with his own emotions, because while the confession did not redefine his identity in the same way, it has forced him to confront the fragility of family narratives, the ease with which lies can become legacy, and he begins to question his own assumptions, his own certainties, realizing that love does not protect against deception, and that realization leaves him feeling exposed, vulnerable in a way he has never experienced before. The truth eventually demands to be spoken aloud, because silence after confession becomes complicity, and when Ridge finally gathers the family together, his voice is steady but brittle, as if held together by sheer will. And he lays out the truth not with drama but with resignation, because by now the shock has settled into something colder, something heavier, and the reactions vary: disbelief, anger, tears, denial, each response a reflection of how deeply Eric's secret has embedded itself into their lives. And as accusations fly and voices rise, Ridge realizes that this is the true aftermath of Eric's confession, not the moment of revelation but the slow, painful disentangling of lives built on a false foundation, and he watches as relationships strain under the weight of this knowledge, alliances shift, old wounds reopen, and he understands that Eric's final act has set off a chain reaction that cannot be stopped, only endured. Late one night, unable to sleep, Ridge returns to the room where Eric died, standing alone in the quiet, and for the first time since the confession he allows himself to speak out loud, addressing the absence rather than the man. And he admits that part of him wishes Eric had stayed silent, that ignorance would have been easier, but another part of him knows that living a lie is its own kind of death, and this internal conflict mirrors the larger truth Eric left behind, that honesty and harm are not opposites, that sometimes they coexist in the same breath, and as Ridge grapples with this paradox, he realizes that the choice now belongs to him, not to redefine the past, which is impossible, but to decide what kind of future he will build from its ruins, and that realization does not bring peace, but it does bring a fragile sense of agency, a reminder that while Eric controlled the narrative for decades, Ridge is no longer bound to continue it. Liam, meanwhile, finds himself drawn into conversations he never expected to have, offering comfort he does not feel fully equipped to give, listening to fears that echo his own, and he begins to see the family not as a monolith but as a collection of individuals each grappling with their own version of loss, and he understands that Eric's confession has not only destroyed illusions but exposed vulnerabilities, forcing honesty into spaces where it was never welcome, and this exposure, while painful, carries the potential for something different, something more real, and that possibility unsettles him as much as it intrigues him, because growth born of trauma is never guaranteed. It requires intention, courage, and time, all of which feel in short supply. As weeks pass, the rawness dulls slightly, but the damage remains, etched into daily interactions, into the way names are spoken, into the hesitation before decisions are made, and Ridge slowly begins to reclaim pieces of himself not defined by bloodlines or legacy but by choice, questioning what truly matters to him now that the narrative he inherited has been stripped away, and this process is neither linear nor graceful, marked by setbacks and moments of clarity that fade as quickly as they appear, but it is movement, and movement feels like survival, and Liam watches this evolution with a mixture of concern and respect, recognizing that rebuilding after a truth like this is not about returning to who you were but about becoming someone new, someone forged in the aftermath rather than defined by the past. Eric's absence remains palpable, not just because he is gone but because his presence lingers in every unresolved emotion, every unanswered question, and the family comes to understand that his final confession was not an ending but a beginning of sorts, a forced reckoning that stripped away comfort in favor of truth, and while that truth is devastating, it also offers a strange clarity, a chance to stop pretending, to stop performing roles assigned by lies, and as Ridge stands one morning, looking out over the city, the weight of Eric's last words still heavy but no longer paralyzing, he acknowledges that the truth destroyed his world as he knew it, but it did not destroy his ability to choose what comes next, and that understanding, hard-won and fragile, becomes the quiet, unspoken legacy Eric left behind, not the lie that defined the past, but the truth that demands a different future, one built not on illusion but on the painful, undeniable reality of who they are now, after everything has changed. The days stretch onward with a strange elasticity, each one heavy with the awareness that nothing can ever fully return to what it was, and yet life, indifferent and relentless, continues to demand participation, forcing the family to move through routines that now feel hollow and unfamiliar, and Ridge, caught between obligation and exhaustion, begins to notice how the smallest moments trigger waves of emotion he cannot control. A chair left empty at the table, a decision deferred out of habit, because it once belonged to Eric, a phrase spoken aloud that echoes his father's voice, and each reminder tightens something in his chest, because grief has evolved into something more complex, a layered ache that combines loss with resentment, love with betrayal, and as he navigates these contradictions, he realizes that the hardest part is not accepting that Eric lied, but accepting that the lie was entwined with genuine moments of care, guidance, and pride, because it would be easier to vilify a villain than to reconcile the fact that the man who deceived him also shaped him in ways that cannot simply be discarded, and this realization forces Ridge into an uncomfortable reckoning with nuance, with the understanding that people are not defined by a single truth, even when that truth is devastating, and this ambiguity becomes the battlefield of his internal struggle. At the office, the weight of legacy presses harder than ever, because Forrester Creations is no longer just a symbol of success and family pride, it is a monument built atop a fractured narrative, and Ridge finds himself questioning decisions he once made instinctively, wondering how much of his drive was fueled by the need to prove a place he now knows was never guaranteed in the way he believed. And this uncertainty seeps into his leadership, not as weakness but as hesitation, a pause where certainty once lived, and while some interpret this shift as vulnerability, others sense a deeper transformation taking place, one that strips away ego in favor of reflection, and Ridge himself is not sure whether this change will ultimately strengthen him or unravel him further, but he knows he cannot return to blind confidence, because confidence without truth now feels dangerous, and that awareness reshapes how he sees power, success, and control. Liam, observing these shifts from a quieter distance, begins to feel the ripple effects of Eric's confession in his own life more acutely, because as Ridge grapples with identity, Liam grapples with trust, questioning how well anyone can truly know the people they love, and this doubt manifests in subtle ways, second-guessing conversations, reading between lines that may not contain hidden meaning, and while he tries to reassure himself that not every relationship is built on deception, the seed of skepticism has been planted, and it changes how he listens, how he responds, how vulnerable he allows himself to be, and this internal recalibration leaves him both more cautious and strangely more empathetic, because he recognizes how fear drives silence, how shame sustains lies, and how truth, when delayed, becomes weaponized by time. Conversations about Eric become increasingly complicated, because memories are no longer neutral, they are interrogated, dissected, reframed, and the family struggles to agree on how to speak of him, whether to honor his accomplishments without acknowledging his failures, or to confront the full scope of who he was, and this tension surfaces during moments meant for remembrance, when stories once told with fondness now trail off into discomfort, and Ridge finds himself alternating between defending Eric against harsh judgment and resenting any attempt to soften the truth, because both extremes feel wrong, and this ambivalence mirrors his internal state, torn between protecting the image of his father and demanding accountability, and he realizes that mourning someone like Eric requires holding space for contradiction, a task far more exhausting than simple grief. As time passes, the shock fades but the consequences deepen, because the truth Eric revealed begins to influence decisions that extend beyond emotion, touching legal, professional, and relational boundaries, and Ridge is forced to confront practical implications of the confession, each one reinforcing that this was not merely a personal revelation but a structural upheaval, and with each new complication, the anger resurfaces, sharper now, because the ripple effects feel endless, and he begins to understand that Eric's final act was not a single moment of honesty but the release of a pressure that had been building for decades, and once unleashed, it could not be contained, and this understanding brings a grim clarity, that the devastation was not caused by the confession itself, but by the years of silence that preceded it. Late at night, when the world grows quiet enough to hear his own thoughts, Ridge begins to write, not for publication or clarity but for survival, pouring fragmented memories and emotions onto paper, attempting to untangle the